The alarm started long before anyone realized something was wrong. It wasn't a siren or a shout or even the crackle of a radio. It was a dog. A single sharp bark that sliced through the ordinary airport noise like a warning from somewhere deeper than instinct. Passengers froze for a moment as the police dog, a trained K9 named Arrow, lunged toward a nondescript black suitcase abandoned near the window of Terminal C. No one knew yet that inside that suitcase was something that would change the lives of several strangers forever and reveal a truth more heartbreaking and miraculous than any security threat could have prepared them for. But Arrow knew, and he refused to let anyone pass. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe, because what happens next proves that sometimes heroes have 4 legs and a heartbeat trained to protect us even from the things we don't understand. The airport had been unusually crowded that morning, with families rushing to catch connecting flights, business travelers glued to their phones, and vacationers already dreaming of sunny beaches. Among them was Officer Daniel Hayes, moving with the slow, steady pace of a man who had done this job for over a decade. He trusted Arrow more than he trusted most humans, because Arrow had never once failed him. Together, they had stopped drugs, explosives, and even found a missing child inside a restroom stall 2 years earlier. But on that morning, something felt off. Arrow had been restless since they entered the terminal. His ears perked, his tail stiff, his nose constantly working the air as if trying to track a fading ghost. Daniel assumed it was just the congestion or the mix of international scents confusing him, but when they neared the row of seats by the large glass windows, Arrow suddenly froze. His paws slid against the polished floor as he dug in, refusing another step forward without investigating. Then, with a sharp, sudden movement that startled everyone within 30 feet, he lunged at a plain black suitcase standing against a pillar. He didn't attack it, but pressed his snout against the zipper, whining with an urgency Daniel had rarely heard from him. Something inside that bag wasn't right. Passengers backed away quickly, whispering nervously, thinking the same thing everyone thinks when a K9 zeroes in on luggage. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he called for backup and began clearing the immediate area, praying silently that this wasn't another bomb scare. But even as he followed protocol, something about Arrow's behavior bothered him. Arrow wasn't signaling explosives. He wasn't barking in that short, repetitive pattern Daniel had drilled into him for years. Instead, he whined low and mournful, circling the bag, nudging it with a gentleness that didn't match the idea of danger. It was almost as if he sensed something alive inside. When the bomb squad arrived, they approached cautiously, but Arrow kept trying to block them, nosing their gear, whining louder each time they got closer. Daniel had never seen him this distressed, and the sound tore at him. Finally, unable to ignore his partner's instincts, Daniel requested permission to open the suitcase slowly, manually, and under controlled conditions, instead of detonating it. It was an unusual call, but something in Arrow's eyes convinced him there was no explosive inside, only something that needed help. The bomb technicians reluctantly agreed, and they formed a perimeter while Daniel crouched near the suitcase. The metal zipper felt cold and stubborn beneath his fingers. Arrow pressed against his shoulder, trembling. Daniel took a breath and pulled the zipper open inch by inch until the suitcase parted enough for him to see what Arrow had been sensing all along. Inside, wrapped in a thin blanket, was a baby, a tiny newborn no more than a few days old, weak, quiet, and barely moving. The blanket was damp from tears or condensation or maybe fear itself. When Daniel lifted it carefully, the baby gave a frail cry, and Arrow immediately pushed closer, sniffing frantically as if trying to make sure she was real. Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Several people covered their mouths, others whispered prayers, and for a moment the huge bustling airport seemed to hold its breath. Medical personnel rushed in, but Daniel kept holding the child longer than anyone expected. Something in the infant's helpless trembling anchored his hands to her small body, as if letting go might break something fragile beyond repair. Arrow sat pressed against his leg, refusing to move away. He had found her, he had insisted, and somehow he had known she needed saving before anyone else could see the signs. Authorities immediately began investigating. CCTV footage revealed a young woman placing the suitcase near the window, her shoulders shaking before she hurried into a restroom and vanished through a side exit. It became clear she hadn't abandoned the child out of cruelty but desperation. She had left a note inside the suitcase explaining that she had no family, no safety, and no way to care for her baby. Her final words begged for forgiveness and prayed that whoever found the child would give her a chance at life. The media storm erupted instantly, and by afternoon Arrow had become a worldwide sensation. Headlines praised him as a hero, news clips replayed the dramatic moment again and again. But Daniel found no joy in the attention. The baby haunted his thoughts, especially her tiny, fragile cry, and the way she had gripped the edge of his uniform as if pleading not to be alone. Arrow, too, behaved differently afterward, staying unusually close to Daniel, pacing restlessly whenever the baby's hospital footage played on television. It was as if the two of them had taken on a responsibility they hadn't expected. Days passed and authorities worked to track down the mother, but the more Daniel learned, the more complicated the situation became. The woman had fled an abusive environment and feared for her child's safety if she stayed. Despite her desperate decision, her note revealed deep love, not indifference. And now her baby waited in a hospital crib, monitored and cared for, but with no family stepping forward. Something in Daniel's chest tightened every time he thought of it. On a quiet evening after another round of questioning for the investigation, Daniel sat on the floor of his living room, still in uniform, staring at the wall. Arrow lay beside him, resting his head in Daniel's lap. Daniel's thoughts spiraled. He had spent years protecting strangers, enforcing laws, rescuing victims. But never had he felt such a pull toward someone he barely knew. Maybe it was because the baby had been so close to death. Maybe it was because she had been so small, tucked inside a suitcase, cold and alone. Or maybe it was because Arrow had chosen to find her, and Daniel trusted Arrow more than anything. The question formed slowly, but when it settled in his heart, it felt immovable. Could he take responsibility for her? Could he give her the life she had nearly lost? Could he become the family she had been left begging? For the next morning he inquired about fostering and eventually adopting the baby. The social worker looked stunned at first, but after learning the details of the rescue, the sincerity in Daniel's voice and the dedication Arrow had shown, they agreed to begin the process. Nothing would be immediate. The system was complex, but doors began to open. And every time Daniel visited the baby in the hospital, Arrow would sit carefully beside the crib, his ears up, his tail still, as if guarding her from the world. Weeks later, when Daniel was finally allowed to take her home temporarily, Arrow stayed glued to her side. The baby giggled for the first time when Arrow nudged her blanket. Daniel felt something crack open inside him, a tenderness he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. The little girl who had been abandoned in a suitcase was now wrapped in safety. Warmth and a devotion she could never have imagined. Airport's busyness and chaos continued as always, but every officer who heard the story felt something shift inside them. Arrow wasn't just a trained detection dog. He had been a vessel of instinct, empathy, and a kind of wisdom that humans sometimes forget to use. His leap at the suitcase had saved a life, and in many ways had saved Daniel too, giving him purpose outside the uniform, outside the rigid rules of his job. Months passed, and when the adoption was finalized, Arrow stood proudly beside Daniel as he signed the last document. The baby, now named Hope, reached out a tiny hand toward Arrow, and he pressed his nose gently into her palm. It became a moment captured in a single photograph, one that would later be framed in Daniel's home, as a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected events lead to the deepest transformations. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that love, protection, and courage can come from the most unexpected places. And before the story ends, please comment below with one word that describes how this journey made you feel. Hope grew stronger day by day, surrounded by affection, laughter, and the quiet, vigilant presence of the dog who had given her a second chance. Daniel watched her take her first steps, with Arrow pacing beside her, ready to steady her if she stumbled. He watched her sleep peacefully in her crib, the soft rise and fall of her chest reminding him of the day he found her fighting for breath inside cold walls of a suitcase. And he watched her smile, a smile that carried a light big enough to mend pieces of his own heart he didn't realize were broken. In the end, the moment that stunned everyone at the airport had become the beginning of a story far greater than a viral headline. It became a story of redemption and healing, of instincts stronger than fear, and of love that arrived in a form Daniel never expected. When Arrow leapt toward that suitcase, he didn't just detect danger. He detected life fragile and worth saving. And that single leap created a family that none of them could have imagined.